Welcome, everyone. My name is Jenna Dana. I'm the Education and Community Engagement Lead here at BIMA. Before we get started, please make sure that your phones are in silent mode. Food and drink is welcome here in the auditorium tonight. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is within the ancestral territory of the Suquamish, people of clear salt water, the Suquamish people. Expert fishermen, canoe builders, and basket weavers, the Suquamish, live in harmony with the lands and waterways along Washington's central Salish Sea, as they have for thousands of years. Here, the Suquamish live and protect the land and waters of their ancestors for future generations, as promised by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. So this evening, we are very happy and glad to host Anna Odessa Linzer, reading from her latest book, Season Unleashed, followed by a conversation with Holly Hughes. There will be time for questions and answers with the audience at the end of their conversation, and also Anna will be selling and signing books afterward as well. So welcome.
Thank you. I am so glad and honored to be here and happy how Jenna has put this all together, and she invited us, or should I say, accepted our invitation to come. So we're really glad to be here. I'm glad to be here. And I would also like to say thanks to Holly and John for their publishing, Season Unleashed. Wonderful to work with them as publishers and longtime friends. And then I would like to say thank you to Katie Morgan for this. She designed the cover, and Katie is over there. Raise your hand, Katie. Anyway, Katie is a longtime Indianola person, and I was thinking, Katie, that there are so many connections and so many stories that we have. I feel like I've known you for lifetimes. So and that was wonderful to do together. And then also thank you to Phoebe and where's Phoebe? Back there. Phoebe and Kathleen, who are Raven Chronicles, along with other people. They published several of the poems in here, first in Raven Chronicles, and I've had other things published there. And that's wonderful to remember, so thank you. And I guess here we go. First light. In the cove below the treehouse, there is a single spotted harbor seal, the only one in the bay, maybe in the world this morning. She slips beneath the water and flies just under the still surface. Diving deeper, she takes with her the rest of my day, leaving only her slender brushstroke of white light in the pewter gray dawn. That's the only poem that actually is not in here, although Phoebe and Kathleen did publish this first in Raven Chronicles. The rest of the poems are from Season Unleashed, which is, I've written a lot of poems. This is a collection of some of them, a few of them, from 35 years. So, and they're all mixed up together. Spring, false start. Spring came on schedule, bursting and opening and revealing and coaxing even the most reluctant. But a cold breath of winter air returned as if from some uneasy memory, and like a film strip broken mid-reel, the season's dance was caught mid-step, frozen in time. In shorts and a heavy black sweater, I am a mixed metaphor of this season of cruel teasing. I stoke the wood stove all day, startled and confused by the sudden return of cold. It is evening shadow that lifts my eyes. I look out the window, past the kitchen table, in a room tightly packed, tightly locked against the brace of wind and rain, against a season that last week promised so much more. And there I see, through the swirling sea of gray, the sun yellow of Scotch broom. And as I have said in the introduction here, these poems are not only from Indianola, many of them are from Indianola, but they're from Shaw Island, Dabob, the Hoh River, and this one is from Shaw. Crack of branch. Close enough to the water to feel and hear the heartbeat of waves against the rock, I take in the change of season along the wooded path as if taking in a breath. And I just breathe it all in. Sound and splash of color and rich smell and slant of light and texture. A familiar world that has changed everything and nothing. The world, too, is just breathing. It is as if fall is the lover I have been waiting all these days for, and I lean into the musky, earthy smell of his neck, breathe it in, remember, and yet it is not memory. The warm flesh of it is next to my flesh, in my nostrils, on my fingertips. And then, startled by crack of branch, I feel the forest quicken and so suddenly push out a buck just feet from me. Head erect, he stops, he eyes me, tilts his rack towards me, considers, then leaps. And it is only then, in the leaping away, that I see what I had missed. The sheen of his last week in velvet antlers, buffed to ivory by branch and bark in anticipation, following the awakening itch of the season. It is his season within the season that pulls me away from quiet thoughts of fires in the wood stove, books to read, soup to make, knitting to cast on. Instead, I feel the fire and heat and the full thrust of his rise from his days of slumber in shaded summer grasses. My breath catches, and it is tango music, the click of high heels against a wood floor, the heady smell of perfume and sweat that carries me the rest of the way down the trail to the sandy cove littered with salty kelp and drift. I am dizzy now with the rush and rise of this season I thought I knew. Green. Outside, under the warmed rainwater, showering, I stare into the green of spruces and hemlocks and cedars beyond the small clearing in this patch of rainforest that still lives, still grows, still breathes, still drips with lichen and moss and fern along this river, and I find myself again dizzy with all the shades of winter's green being invaded by spring's thrust of bud and leaf and branch. A box for a Crayola 120 pack of crayons would not have room for all these shades of moss and needle and leaf and grass and lichen and vine, each holding their own array of green, not just species, but each tree, each plant, each side, north, east, south, west, holding its own color chart. I want to say, look at these greens, but I am alone in a downpour of cold March rain and warm rainwater in the quiet clearing, And spring is just one season. Today is just one day. This is just one place in one forest. Tomorrow, the light will shift. The yellows and grays and browns and whites and reds and more will always have their way with these greens. I know the shower is running long, pulling rainwater from the corrugated metal tank. Standing modestly, shyly, boldly, alone under cedar and vine maple, attached to the gutters by a single pipe, like an umbilical cord to the heavens. But a day of hard rain gives me more water, more time to soak these greens into eye and skin and heart. Drunk on greens with no name, I turn the shower off and reach for my green towel, knowing it is not even a near relative to the green feast beyond me, knowing it holds green like a stolen title. For this one green moment, the virus is gone. Just like that. My aching heart is filled with a warmth, like clear rainwater on my skin, washing out the dis-ease of sorrow and fear. That was out of the Hoh. Tansy. Pull the tansy, I was told, and like all interlopers on the edge of the ticker tape of time and memory, I ignored the islander's imperative and watched. Waiting for the bold yellow, the aromatic scent, thinking I would hastily pull them just before they seeded, I enjoyed their brash presence. They too come from other shores, uninvited. At dusk, I walk the edge of the knoll to admire their wicked alien ways, as if meeting a secret lover. And there, in the fading northern light, a riot of workers garbed in prison stripes of black and yellow, a chain gang of smooth-skinned larvae. The offspring of cinnabar moth, that delicate black moth with red dots and calligraph brushstrokes on wings that fluttered through our doors on unpacking days in May. Field guide in hand, I read aloud to their low crunching, made as if in agreement with me, as they hear what they had always known. The tansy ragwort and the cinnabar moth are married in a dance. The cinnabar sworn to fidelity, the tansy her only partner. I go on and read. More effective than pulling is the use of the caterpillar, the cinnabar moth. How can one need the other so completely, with such faithfulness, as each kiss strips away the season's hot promise? And now, days later, I see bare stalks, flowers only a memory, and the fatted blimps of the caterpillar clutching the last lower leaves. And the earth is suddenly a memory of color, red and black and yellow and green. How strange this dance, this alien world become familiar, settling in, each dancing their own last dance. And yet, just down the ridge, I see 3 perfect stalks, fully flowered, away from the tight, busy neighborhood above the rock ridge. They lean coolly into each other as they gaze into the bright mirror of the day and then turn, whispering as soft as a summer breeze, to slowly thumb through the pages of the calendar, marking time. Well, I guess I should say this has to do with Holly. Tattoo you. After reading a story to a writing class, a student asked me why I write in longhand first. Why didn't I go straight to the computer? And I started talking about the feel of the pencil in my hand, the steaming pot of tea on the table, the rhythm, the beat I need to follow. Just as I had tried to say that maybe the writer and the reader are reaching to find the point I did with Mick Jagger when I heard Gimme Shelter on the radio as I was driving off the ferry and up the hill to the college. I was connecting my body to the same beat that moved him to sing, yet I was going somewhere with it Mick would never go. He had been places I would never dream of going. But there it was, an electric moment of transmission, and as writers we have to sing and to dance, but our words have to be the music, the beat, our body, everything. And then I started talking about how it is so different with poetry for me, how it is so much messier than short story writing, how the surge, the charge of poetry flies onto scraps of paper, napkins, magazine covers, and that I usually have bits and pieces, words and lines floating in my purse. And I remembered the words of a poem I'd written for you to connect us across these long, lonely miles. And without thinking further, I reached into my purse, pulled out my checkbook, and opened it to the savings deposit slips in the back. And there it was, my heart, as if I'd unbuttoned my dress in class to say, see, this is where it beats. And I do it again and again to show how I've tattooed words of love everywhere on my body for you. That was in Holly's class. I did not unbutton my dress. Close, but... Reading aloud. I read my own poetry aloud. Feel the words roll like pearls against my tongue, my teeth, and I find them, the words I need just now, written forward from years before. I wonder, who is this younger self? I feel such tenderness and as if she had secretly, years ago, planted an orchard for me, knowing one day that I would be so hungry that I would reach for the apple's ripe, tart flesh and feel for one slight second the touch of her warm fingers against mine, the soft, sweet breeze of her breath against my cheek. And that girl was the girl that was in the advertisement to this, right? Crumbled. Cookies that had traveled packed tight in the then square-cornered, clean postal box, now returned dented, stained, tired from the jet-fueled flight south, the slow crawl north. It looked to have been kicked back up the long coast by steel-tipped logging boots. Chocolate cookies for granddaughters missed their mark of family. Patience is not a USPS virtue. Home, crumbled, slightly stale, almost unrecognizable. They sat in the back of the refrigerator, as if the clean, dark coolness could restore and make whole what would not be. As if the cool stainless steel box could contain my own misplaced sadness at so many misconnections. Ziploc opened. I spread the dried contents on the deck railing above the crash of waves, echoing from yesterday's storm. Gulls and crows and jays, more than I could count. Branches, deck, railing, airful. Cookie party, just as I had imagined it, but with a new guest list. Hold on, I gotta take a little, phew. A lot of cookies. It's funny, some of these poems I know exactly where I wrote them, where I was, which place. Some of them I have no idea. And I think this might be one. I think one thing one time and another time. Northwest Endless Summer. Summer split full open in July, spilling tomatoes and blossoms, washing in warm water that brightly holds fractured sunlight by day, ribbons of moonlight by night. Grass burns and browns. Apples and berries ripen. Mushrooms dry ceramic hard in heat stiffened moss, even in the deepest trail through the rainforest. And still, the sun is relentless in its giving, as if to say, you always wanted more, here it is. And so we breathe in the white light of October, repeating a mantra of gratitude we found scribbled in the margins of an old, dusty leather book, long forgotten on the shelf, and try to exhale the rising unease at so much, so unseasonably much. We're back in Dabob here. Almost forgetting. The maple leaf yellow against the rain-brightened green of thick moss, coming up beneath and alongside the fallen branches, strewn as if a crazy puzzle made to throw me off. But there they are, everywhere I turn, chanterelles. And our baskets fill as we move alone, but always within a whistle reach. I bend, and with each snapping pull against my fingers, I feel the dark bats of discontent fly from the window of the attic I call my mind. Only golden yellow, only green, only the gift of soil and rain and forest, and something as pure and bright and unknowable in its trueness as love. And then I stand to stretch, only then seeing what the simple harvest had let me forget, the clear cut around me. Oh, I want to start crying. The seasons dancing through us. The set design is changed. The blaze of yellows and golds is lit with low muted light. Yet sometimes a brilliant spot is thrown that lights all, until even the shadows that held colors that have no name are pierced. Sometimes a darkening down lulls and threatens to erase even memory of color. For the play is taking a shift. The homey story of goose and gander and gosling, the straight black lines joining bay to shore to beach, has altered. The tribe gathers. The sounds change. A constant shifting in and out, each family reluctant to leave summer's stage perfection of form and function that seem to promise foreverness. How could perfection do otherwise? A wild Sumi painting of web prints on wet gray sand, a single downy feather floating on the water without piercing the surface, as if water would deny the touch. Another feather, another. The sudden winged dance as if on tow, a rehearsal so lovely that anything more is impossible to imagine. But this is a traveling act, carried far out and beyond this little island and its clear, cold bays, and even then, The set here will change and change again in anticipation and imagination until all that remains is the empty stage and shards of winter's cold, clear light and dark vestiges of the season's glory litter the sightlines. Yet even the darkest shapes silently hold next year's story in bud and branch and water and sky, heavy dark loom of earth. As we wait, somewhere behind the dark velvet curtains of time and distance, all is being prepared in line and motion and desire. As the lights dim and the darkness around me, we hold memory. As a mulled wine in our warm mugs holds other seasons against our tongues. And we turn to each other as we rise from our seats and into a shadow of ourselves, and we already dream the unimaginable return. A return that is never a return, always new. Swimming lessons. So dark is this cold season that even the candles were lit between us this morning as we shared warm toast and strawberry jam and drank a hot tea of hibiscus flowers and ginger and lemon, seeking in this midwinter meal the taste of other seasons. And I watched your face, your eyes, your lips, as you told me that the dark side of this full moon was pulling you away again, and that you would be gone by the time the moon had fallen into the stillness of solstice. All day I kept close to the fire, inside the circle of its heat. And like the light, I followed winter's grace, asking little, giving little, holding the pale beauty of the day in my mouth like green tea. I watched myself swim through the winter light, a light that stayed in morning until suddenly it slipped softly into evening and was gone. It was almost midnight when I followed your taillights out the drive and walked alone to the dock. It was there that I felt the pull of the moon on the tide, on me, on my heart, already so pulled by the ebb and flow of your coming and going, the nightly stretch of cold, barren sand, leaving me exposed, gasping for breath. And just below me, below the dock, a quarter-mile from shore where low tide sand meets the water that I swim in every season of the year, I saw a dancing path of ripples, a circle of broken moons. Deeper, under the waves, was a still patch of white. My mind quickly raced through fish and fowl as I emptied my pockets of tarnished pennies and beach glass, tossing them one by one to frighten away the living until it became the heavy stillness that I followed, becoming suspended, finding the woman whose plane 3 days earlier had fallen from the sky, from a perfect pale winter sky, into water so deep that even an army of helicopters and searchlights could not penetrate its darkness. Don't they know that some of us only reveal our death by moonlight? My pocket's empty now. I hold the last penny in my hand, watching, imagining how the white blouse was ballooning so full in the tide, holding her there to this place she fell into that cannot fall from, held, floating. It was the yellow of the sun's light that caught and reflected the brilliance of another moment, seasons and years ago, in the heat of summer on this same beach. I was young, just 13, but already the swimming teacher, teaching the children to swim in the water by the dock. A small gold box, so perfectly square, sat in a tide pool in the sand, far from the rocky shore. On the lowest tide of the year, just feet from the drop-off, where the world drops so quickly away into the depths of the bay. I could only imagine the flash and hardness of diamonds, the blood red of rubies in such a box, so foreign on this beach of broken drift and kelp and gray stones. My breath caught. And as I kneeled to open it, pulling aside thick white cotton, heavy with salt water, I lifted to my hands what only in my palms began to take form. Finger bones, teeth, and a dusty powder of gray ash clinging to my damp flesh. In the bottom of the box was a white card bearing black type words, a woman's name, a date, and other neatly spaced words at once too intimate and too coldly factual for my young eyes. Turning to leave, to begin my walk home through winter's moonlight, I threw the last penny, warmed now from my hand. But it was only when I had slipped into the steaming pleasure of a hot bath by candlelight that I let myself remember, let myself become the young girl who was thrown from the dock years before when my own sons were still babies. It was winter, cold, clear, and moonlit like this night, and I, like the rest of this little town, was sleeping under the heavy, warm weight of wool blankets and dreams. But she, barely 13, too young to be out at that hour, even in the sweet perfume of a summer night, was carried across the ferry, locked in the trunk of a madman's car. Even with my own flesh reddening in the hot water of my bath, the door had opened, and I could feel the ice-cold wind of that night and her fear. Raped and bleeding, she was taken to the end of the dock, a quarter mile from shore, and thrown into the water far below. Not even the splash of the waves on the pilings would have drowned out the sound of his raspy breathing as he waited above for her own young lungs to fill with cold salt water. How many lifetimes passed until she knew he had heard death's silence, and she listened to his footsteps as he walked up the long dock into his warm car, where his headlights cast a small circle of light into the darkness in a twisted flash of hope as he drove away. I stared into the yellow of the candle's flame to taste the blood and follow the heat of his trail in the incoming tide and water I know is so cold that it pierces flesh as deeply as the sharpened steel of knife blades. And I fixed my eyes on the single light on the shore, the light in the bedroom of a window of an elder woman, alone in her insomnia and her dreams. And it too becomes the story of how I begin to remember how to swim like that young girl, the long, cold distance through death, and emerge wet and naked and numb, seeking, as I seek to be, light in a window of a home where the words, "Please help," even through the silence of frozen lungs, will be heard. Where a warm blanket, a cup of hot tea come before questions. Remembering what I had never known, I fall into bed, into waiting, into the turning circle of water and light, feeling them both in the pulsing in my veins, dreaming them into the grace of breath. In my life, I often think of wanting to be that person that brings out a cup of tea and a warm blanket before any questions are asked. So this is in the same town. Memory's Child, community potluck in the fall. She said, "Oh, and you live here, how nice. I haven't been here in years. When Janie called me, I just had to come. Janie and I, when we were just girls, we used to ride the ferry across the bay. Oh, it must be 65 years ago." With a turn of her hand, she gestures out the open door of the old clubhouse, out past the covered porch, the sloping lawn, through the yellow of the maple leaves, to the beach, to the dock, a fishing pier now. And his white head turns with her. They see past two boys casting lines into a lipstick sunset. She leans a little closer and laughs quietly. We told our mothers we were going to Alice Patterson's, but really we came to see the Brennan brothers. There were 6 Brennan brothers. Oh my, Janie was sweet on Edward Brennan. But I had my eye on the older brother, a redhead, and such blue, blue eyes. Oh my, she said, her hands on her heart. He was such a handsome young man, that Whit Brennan. Whit Brennan, he said. Oh my, yes, did you know him? Whit Brennan? Why, I'm Whit Brennan, he said. And that is it.
Oh, thank you, Annie. Can you hear me okay out there? Great. Okay. Oh, Annie, what a beautiful, powerful reading from that lovely opening poem, First Light, with the seal parting the sea, to the intensity and pathos of swimming lessons. You took us on a journey, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to, before we go on with our discussion, I just want to say a couple thanks. I want to thank Jenna for the invitation to be part of this wonderful series, and to Bima for hosting it. I think in these challenging times, we need the arts more than ever, so I'm really grateful for Bima and other organizations like that. And I also want to thank everybody for turning out tonight. It's a beautiful, I guess, early fall. I can't say late summer now. It's a beautiful early fall evening, and it's great to share it with you all. And so I'm really happy to be here on stage forgive me, I will probably call Anna Annie.
Call me Annie, please.
Okay, because that's how I've known Annie over many years, decades, in fact. And I'm up here as both the co-publisher of Empty Bowl Press, and we had the honor of publishing this fine collection, and a longtime friend. So it's a great opportunity for us to talk about our shared community of Indianola, our love of writing and the whole world of books, and our shared love of swimming, too. So I want to dive in. Annie, your preface is such a great description of the power of living near water. Is it okay if I read that?
Of course.
Okay. I've lived most of my life in Indianola, Washington, on the Suquamish Port Madison Indian Reservation, where I expected to always live. The wonder of these unleashed seasons is that I have been tossed to other wild places. Shaw Island, Dabob Bay, the Hoh River. I have always found home along the water. These poems and prose passages are a kaleidoscope of seasons that I have danced through, that have danced through me, that I carry with me. All my writing comes from my deep connection to the Pacific Northwest, from the generations of people I have known, stories I have heard, from the homes and gardens I have tended, and the waters I swim in year-round. I just wanted to share that. I know you heard a lot of pieces of that during Annie's wonderful reading, but I think water is such a powerful theme in her work, so just wanted to give it the kind of attention it deserves. So Annie, I met you, I moved to Indianola, I moved off my sailboat. Actually, I was living on a sailboat in Eagle Harbor. I moved off my sailboat and into my log cabin on Division Street, and in 1990, and I met you, I think, on the beach. What do you remember?
Okay, what I remember is that, oh, am I on? Am I on? Okay. Raven Chronicles had a reading at Elliott Bay. I was one of the people there, and I think I had seen you, but we'd never been introduced. It was, I don't know why it was being recorded. There was a big old, back in the days when you had, real cameras, and they were recording it, and you introduced yourself, and I think asked me that night if I would come to your class and talk. So that was the beginning of going to her class and becoming friends. And I think it must have been 93, early 93.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought it would be fun to put that as a puzzle to see what you remember, what I remember.
Well, I think I saw you on the beach because Annie and I both share a love of swimming, and I know I saw you, but I think I was too in awe of you to talk to you. So thank you to Raven Chronicles for giving me that opportunity to go up to you. And I was teaching writing at Edmonds Community College then, and so I was always on the lookout for guest speakers. And so I think you're right. I asked you to come to my class.
And that's where Tattoo You came from,
right.
Holly's class.
Right, and I want to I want people to hear the rest of that story, Annie. So there's part of what happened that afternoon in my class that didn't get into the poem.
Well, I came to Holly's class several times when Holly was there. I would read my work, sometimes short stories, talk to people, have conversations. And then one time I was invited, Holly couldn't make it and told me she couldn't make it. And boy, the questions changed when Holly wasn't there. And one of the questions was, how often do I, revise? How much do I revise? And I said, revise? I don't revise. I just write it down. And they said, well, Holly says, as I remember, you should revise 7 times. And I said, if you're happy with it, it's ready. If you're not, write something else. And that was my answer. I believe that might have been the last time I came to Holly's class.
And imagine my surprise when I came to class the next day and the students were like, guess what Annie said? We don't have to revise. I'm not sure I said 7 times, but I am a believer in
was
revision.
Some number.
Yeah. I'm sure it was more than 2 or 3 times.
And I should probably add, I have never taken a writing class. And so I can make it up as I go along because nobody told me what to do. And I took a lab writer at Roosevelt High School in Seattle in my junior year, and I learned to think about writing by reading. An amazing teacher, and she gave lectures. We had to write a lot. I remember none of the writing. I have 1 poem left, but I remember the reading, and it sent me on. What I remember the most is Faulkner, starting there. So that was my only writing class. So there you go.
Well, I mean, Faulkner's a great introduction. That explains the long sentences.
Actually, I will say I went to Broward College in Florida for my book, Ghost Dancing. It was the all-college read. Everybody had to read it. And that was really great. So that sometime there would be 500 or 600 people gathered, and I'd get to talk to them. And at one point, the person who put it together, it was a college that brought people from all over the world that spoke 7 or 8 languages, and I didn't even know what countries they were when they told me. It was an amazing experience. And they were people who had had careers before and needed to start again. And there were also a lot of people that barely made it through high school. So they needed something that everybody could read, and as he said, would be really easy And he said, whoa. And then after I invited you, I read it again, and I realized it's Faulknerian. And that was the best compliment I've ever had.
Oh, that's a great story, Annie. And I want to say a little bit more about ghost dancing, because I think when we met, you were just working on that. And ghost dancing ended up getting the American Book Award in 1999.
Actually, it's 98. They put the wrong label on the cover.
Oh, okay, 1998. Yeah, and I was, as I said earlier, I was in awe of you. I wrote poetry and essays too, but I've never tried to write journal, and I was so in awe. I love reading fiction, but I'm so in awe of people who can write it. So that was such an amazing. The ability to transport us, to create worlds that we can enter, is always been. It's such a gift to be able to do that. And I guess one of my questions is, did you start out writing fiction and then turn to poetry, or were you writing poetry throughout that time? How did that work?
Well, I wrote a little poetry in high school, or a haiku here and there. And then one day when my kids were little, probably like 1 and 4 or something like that, I got up in Indianola next to the Sibbets and looked out the window, and the cherry blossoms were in bloom, and I had a story running through my head, as I always do. And at that moment, I thought, I could write this down. And that was the first writing I started. I wrote it just as one story, and the first paragraph was about green apples. And it turned into a novel. And then I wrote another novel, and then I wrote a whole bunch of short stories, and then I wrote Ghost Dancing. I was trying to remember this last night. And so I was really writing fiction. And then when did I start writing poetry? I don't know. I guess I was interspersing writing fiction with, and then I wrote 3 more novels. And then I, okay.
Well, I'm really glad you turned to poetry. We just got to hear these amazing, beautiful lyric images. And I just wanted to talk a little bit more about those images specifically. I wanted to share a recent review of your book that was published in Raven Chronicles by the reviewer Nina Barakas. And here's what she wrote. To describe these poems as a celebration of place of the Pacific Northwest is true, but inadequate. It is an extended love letter to the places Linzer has called home, to her people, and through her poetry, to us. This collection is a masterclass in attention, in appreciation. It is an invitation to experience what it feels like to listen and tune oneself to nature. I just thought that just sums it up so beautifully, that your sense of close attention. And I guess I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that. You've captured here so many powerful encounters. You talked about the encounter with the buck. There's killdeers, there's grebes, there's red fox. But what I love is that you also describe some ordinary encounters, like with the tansy, right? And the thistle, and the gooseberry, and the salal. But you describe them in such a way that they come to life on the page. And Ezra Pound called this the luminous details. And I just think that's such a perfect description of what Annie does, those luminous details that just transport us. So I guess my question is, when you look out the window or step out the door, where did this attention come from? Is this born of curiosity? Is it a discipline? How would you describe how
It's not a discipline with me. We'll start there. It just is. I mean, I was remembering my mother telling me, towards the end of her life, that, when you came home from school, you'd be so excited. I thought that there was a parade outside, and it was a leaf in your hand. So, and when I write quickly. So, like, I don't revise. So these poems will come in one sitting. And actually, my first novels, I didn't know that you could stop if you started a chapter. So the first time I wrote, I sat down and wrote 20 pages in longhand to get it done. So I can't help myself, I guess. And it's just where I live all the time. And that was my realization when I looked out the window when I had these stories. I was remembering being a little girl in Indianola walking down the sandspit before there was anybody anywhere. And I would sing stories at the top of my lungs because there was nobody there. I had long stories. It was so great because the sandspit is so long that you really can get a
novel.
A novel, yeah. Anyway.
Oh, I love that image of you, Annie. That's great. And that is what your stories feel like too. And in your poems as well. And I guess that leads to another question, is that if you look at the poems on the page in Annie's book, some are in lines and others are more prose poems. And I guess my question is, and I think the genres are blurring. A prose poem is like a short creative nonfiction or flash nonfiction. And I just wonder, as you're writing, do you have in mind poem, or do you have in mind prose, or do you just see what comes out?
I kind of know what's going to come out. I mean, I know where I am, and I definitely know if I'm going to write a long fiction piece.
Mm-hmm.
In some of the prose poems, I put them in lines at one point and then squished them back up to make them prose poems. I liked them better that way.
You revised.
Well, no, it's not. That's not revision. It's not revision. Yeah. No. I know. I guess I don't even. Well, I did think when I saw these questions. I did think about Gabriela Garcia Marquez, The 100 Years of Solitude. It was always written that it was magical realism. And one point I read, he said, I don't know where they get this magical realism. This is what I see. And so I don't set out to write prose poems, or I will set out to write haiku. That's the only one I will set out to write something particular. But I don't. Something just grabs me, and away I go. Like when I was writing swimming lessons, I could start it, but I had no idea until I sat and started to write where I was going to go with it all.
And that is such a powerful piece, and that one feels to me, it has a lot of the pacing of fiction. I mean, that, and the drama, of course, too. It's so powerful, but yet it has the lyricism and the imagery of poetry. So it really brings the two together, beautifully. Yeah, so I think
Okay.
you're off the hook.
Okay.
I think the other thing I appreciate about your work, Annie, is that you're moving around in time. And one of my questions was going to be, over what period of time were these poems written? And you talked about that, 35 years.
Probably 35 years.
Yeah.
There are some in here that are at least 30 years old, a little more. And there are some there's green is pretty new because it's got, the plague in it. Yeah, so I've got quite a few.
Which leads me to other questions.
Yeah. Okay.
And I guess, one of the things I've noticed in Annie's work too is that in addition to moving around in time in which the poems happen, that I guess that's what I love about poetry, is that we're allowed to time travel. It's kind of what Gabriel Garcia Marquez says about magical realism. Tess Gallagher has a wonderful essay called Poetry as Time Machine, and she talks about how well-suited poetry is to moving around in time. And I think your poems are a great illustration of that. In Reading Aloud, that one, obviously you're moving around in time, the persona is. And then in the last one, too, the wonderful one, the Memory's Child, you also get a sense of time sort of collapsing, and suddenly here they are, right? So I guess my question that comes out of all this is, how has your writing process changed, if it has, over time?
I don't know. You know, I just, it's just who I am then, and so I can't say. And there's definitely a change, I guess. I don't know. I don't know that I just sit down to write. I get pulled by something. The novels in Home Waters. Those I spent a lot of time walking on the tide flats with each of them, and certain characters would just grab me, and then I could go. And there was, I don't know if I'd call it time travel, but I slipped between different times easily in those. I love it. I just love it. I love the characters. I love that I can bring family members that I might not even know, but just know stories of, or friends that I have known, wonderful old men in Indianola that were very close to me who gifted me stories. And I love to be able to take those stories somewhere. So it feels like a gift to have all these stories to move through and put, in is it Blind Virgil? Yeah, I got to bring somebody I'd met from a story from somebody I met in Paulsbo in probably 1975, who told me what she thought was a funny story about her grandmother, great-grandmother was in the South, and a bunch of my family's from the South. So this woman had several children, and then she gave birth to a baby that was a redhead. The father looked at it and said, "You will get out of here now." Got a train ticket for her, and she ended up in Orcas Island. And that story, I was pregnant at the time, and I was just like, oh my God. And they were laughing about it. These were cousins. This is how we got here, this redhead, And it stayed with me and stayed with me and stayed with me. So here in 2000 something, Madeline came to me. I found out who Madeline was, put the story of Madeline that I knew and that story together, and oh boy, was that fun. I mean, so that's how the process kinda is with me.
We'd love to open it up for questions from the audience, and I can pass you the mic if there's anything you'd like to comment on or question.
Thank you so much. I was wondering, I admire and frankly probably envy the ease with which it seems that so much of your writing comes to you, your ability to shapeshift between genres, and your comments about revision. I was wondering if there's anything that's hard for you as a writer.
Life is hard.
Yeah.
I'm sure there is, but I do it from some place that is wonderful and magical. And so I'm in there. I don't know. I mean, sometimes there'll be periods where I'm not writing, and that's kind of hard, but it's not even something I dwell on. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that seems consistent with the ease with which you
Because
you
I'm
love
not
writing.
disciplined enough to do anything else. I don't know.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hi. I've started recently reading novels based in the Pacific Northwest. And I was wondering if you've thought about collaborating with other novelists and contributing your poems and novels and kind of doing the marriage of fiction with poetry.
I'm not understanding, so help me understand that a little
Okay.
bit better.
Like recently, I was reading this novel, Remarkably Bright Creatures, which is based in Pacific Northwest, and there's a giant octopus in it, and so it's like fiction, but it's highlighting the Pacific Northwest beauty. And I feel like your poems, if they could be part of a novel, that would bring so much more to that novel.
One thing that's, two things. One, I have a memoir of the time we lived in the treehouse, and it's full of poems. Then I bring out poems. And then also when I'm writing fiction, I think of a line, I think, oh, that's beautiful, that's great. And then I remember, oh, geez, that's from one of my poems. So it does circle, but I've never done exactly what you're saying, yeah.
Just
But
an
I like
idea.
Yeah, thank you.
I know that Holly wanted to make a few announcements before we break for the book signing.
Yes, thank you, Jenna. And I just wanted to just kind of do a final thank you to Annie. I wanted to quote again from the reviewer, Nina Barakas, because I think this is also beautifully stated. Linzer's poems are a reminder of what is essential, what is worth attending to, the play of light, the complexity of the forest and its multitudes, the cycle of seasons, our relationships, the dreams, and the dancing. So thank you, Annie, for transporting us through the
you.
cycle of the seasons with
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
And I do have a quick announcement, just that Annie's going to be reading again on November 30th. If you have friends who live up in Anacortes and you want to let them know about this reading, it's at Pelican Bay Books, which if you've never been there, it's a wonderful bookstore, both new and used books, and they have a reading series. And Annie will be reading there with a wonderful storyteller by the name of Will Horniak that you will really enjoy meeting. Yeah. And just one other quick event coming up for Empty Bowl that we're excited about, November 10th, up at Friend River Farm and Cidery on this side of the water. We're having a book fair with several other small presses in the area. So it runs from 12 to 5, and we'll have lots of our Empty Bowl books for sale. We'll have the Wandering Bard who will type a poem on command. We'll have book draws and drawings for books and lots of other fun things. So thanks again for coming. And we can move back out into the foyer. Annie has books for sale. She's happy to sign them. And we hope that you'll linger and visit with us.